Okay, we're getting ready to get started. Hope everyone's comfortable. Okay. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Hope everyone's having a good evening. We welcome you to our second panel and our first ever autonomy series. And we're so glad you're here. We're running this series for the month of September with plans for hosting more of these events in the future. We'd love your feedback on that and suggestions as we continue to plan these. We do have a survey that will be handed out at our panel on the 30th. So please join us for that one, which will be on dating and relationships on the spectrum. We are taking questions ahead of time for that one. So if you're planning on attending on September the 30th, be sure to, and if you have questions that you want to ask in advance that can be discussed with our co-host and our panelists ahead of time, and we can prepare some answers ahead of time and it would remain anonymous. Be sure and send those to us. You can send them to my email address and I'll be sure and put that in the chat for all of you. So if you plan on joining us on the 30th, be thinking if you have any questions you might have that you'd like to see addressed, some topics that you want to see addressed on our dating and relationships panel that we're going to be doing with, we're going to be co-hosting with Safe Boston. So, and if you can't make it on the 30th, that is a really good question. We can still send, that is going to be recorded. And so we are planning on recording that, being able to share it after the event. So you still should be able to access that. And if for some reason you're not, we can share the materials with you. So that is a wonderful question. Some of you were able to join us for our first panel on September 2nd. We had so much fun doing that. We thank you all for attending if you were able to make it. That one was regarding accommodations in the workplace and post-secondary settings. We hope you found that to be informative and helpful. Tonight, we continue the discussion together of autonomy around the topic of conflict management and resolution. We feel this very broad and expansive topic is important to capture as much as we can of it and find ways to understand what it can look like from a situational perspective, as well as provide various strategies and ideas around ways to manage it. So it's a part of all of our lives. It's a very, very broad topic that we take in so many different directions, but we're going to try and capture a snapshot of it tonight that would be helpful for everyone attending. Conflict is one of the things we all find ourselves facing, and it can shape our day, our lives, and our outcomes depending on how we approach it. It's not something we can avoid without isolation. And even then, we're left to contend with ourselves. So tonight we're going to cover areas around different types of conflict. And the ones we're really going to focus on are conflict within ourselves, which is our self-confidence, communication, motivation, etc. Then there's going to be conflict with things beyond our control. And in that, we're going to be talking about unexpected changes in plans, something that comes along that we're not prepared to deal with, right? Because sometimes those can create the most internal havoc for us or chaos in our lives. And so we want to make sure we address those. And then conflict with others, right? So disagreements, misunderstandings between friends, relatives, coworkers. And inside those topics, we're going to be addressing areas of stress management, right? Ambiguity of expectations. So sometimes that conflict arises if like things are ambiguous, instructions, expectations, next steps, and then sensory sources, masking, triggers, stress signals, self-regulation, and strategies. So hopefully we'll be able to hit on all those important areas tonight within our conversations. And we'll try and keep these conversations flowing in the direction of post-secondary education world and workplace life. But we all know this topic can affect so much of our lives, so we will allow it to flow as the conversation goes. So Jordan is going to go over some housekeeping stuff before we get started, but we do want to recognize we will be using some questions generated from our self-advocates and panel guests that they came up with through their own experiences. So feel free to ask your questions based on your own experiences, right? Because we all have our own lived experiences and we want to honor those, right? The good and the bad. We want to honor those and recognize those. So sometimes these panels can bring up some of those things for us. And you know, if it helps you to share it with us, please feel free to do that. Doesn't mean we're going to share it with everybody else, but you know, you do have, we are open to that. So also we fully understand and acknowledge that every person is unique. And while there are some commonalities shared in the autism community, we stand by the motto of if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. And so our questions are written with that in mind and are not intended to tokenize or stereotype in any way. So now with that, I'm going to hand it to Jordan, who's going to go over some housekeeping stuff for the evening. Jordan.
Oh, wonderful.
Oh,
Can you all see me?
Yeah, I can see you.
Oh, fantastic. Hello, everyone. My name is Jordan Fogel. I'm the projects coordinator here at the Autism Society of Texas. If you have a question at any point during tonight's event, feel free to post it in the chat thread, which you can find toward the bottom of your screen. It may be minimized, so if you click the More button, the 3 dots down at the bottom, you can scroll up and find the chat thread there. If you'd like to ask a question anonymously, our wonderful intern Stephanie has just posted a link to an anonymous Google form where you can submit your question that way. And there will be a designated time, probably the last 10 to 15 minutes, where we'll be taking your questions, making sure that we get those to the right panelists and getting those answered for you. So again, feel free to ask your questions in the chat thread, and please keep your microphone muted, just so we can minimize background noise. Thanks, y'all. I'm really looking forward to tonight's event.
Thanks, Jordan. We really appreciate you going over all that with us. And now I'm going to turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves. And they're our guests. I'm calling panelists, but they're also our guest hosts. So we're so excited to have every single one of them on board tonight. And I'm going to start with Ashley.
Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here. My name is Ashley Richardson Minute, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker at UT Austin. And my official role at UT is the Autism Spectrum Education and Outreach Administrator within the Office of New Student Services. And I also am the administrator for Longhorn Ties, which is a support service to enrolled college students at UT Austin who identify as being on the autism spectrum or neurodivergent. We launched in January 2020 and we are rocking and rolling. So we are excited to bring something to UT's campus to help more of our students. And I'm excited to be here.
Thank you, Ashley. We love the Longhorn Ties program that it's there. I know there were some things that were sidelined because of COVID and kind of the launching of that and the progress of that, but we're really excited to see where this program goes over the next few years and into the future, because we know this is meeting such a huge need, and we're just excited to see you there. It's awesome. Now I'm going to hand it to Larissa.
Hi, I'm Larissa, and I'm a lead facilitator for a neurodivergent support group. And I'm also a co-contributor to the Pair Mentor Austin Coalition, and I'm an alumni from the Path Building Employment Program, and I'm also autistic.
Thank you, Larissa. As always, it's so nice to have you on our panel. Such an amazing voice. And Larissa has some wonderful resources too that she's created. So later on, we'll kind of chat about that a little bit more. But Larissa, thank you so much for being here. Jen, you're next.
Hello, everybody. I'm Jen LeCompte. I am a Texas certified teacher and a certified life coach. I now am mostly a life coach and learning coach. I'm no longer teaching in public school, but I spent about 18 years working in special education and working also with students who are at risk. And I'm super excited to be here. I don't have much more to say to that.
Thank you, Jen. I actually had the privilege of working with Jen for a few years at special education at a local high school. And I can just honestly say, like, we are so lucky to have Jen on the panel tonight. All right, Olivia.
Hello, my name is Olivia. I was part of this past year's Path Building group with Amy and Jordan. I'm 25 and I just found out I was autistic earlier this year. And so I wanted to be involved in organizations for autistic adults, being a self-advocate and just helping other autistic adults. I also work part-time and I'm in school part-time, but excited to be here and being on the conversation.
Thank you, Olivia. I just want to give you a shout out. Olivia is one of our healthcare heroes and in school. And, you know, we're just so excited to have Olivia on board tonight. And Sydney, you're next.
Yep. Hey, I'm Sydney, as you probably just heard. And I recently graduated from UT Austin a couple of years back, and also, just like Olivia, recently participated in Miss Kellogg's Path Building Employment Program. I'm really happy to be here. And yeah.
Thank you, Sydney. We're excited to have you here. And just to let everyone know, just kind of a treat to be looking forward to. If you are, you know, we hope you can stay for the whole, those of you who are in attendance, we hope you can stay for the whole panel. We're going to hopefully be wrapping up by 9 o'clock. That's kind of our intention, and we're going to stick to that. However, there are some, and part of our, the last part of our sequence in the flow of our panel, when we're talking about workplace conflict and stuff, Olivia, Sydney, and Larissa have created some video modeling goodness that they're going to share with us. So we're really excited to see that. So stick around, because you're gonna be, you know, delighted by that. And it's going to be a wonderful conversation piece as well. And I think our last panel guest host is going to be Benny.
Hi, everybody. I'm Benny. I'm an autistic self-advocate, part-time creative consultant, and I spend some time helping develop the Peer Mentors of Austin Coalition in partnership with Autism Society of Texas, the Greenleaf Neurodiversity Community Center, which is a project of Easter Seals, Access Autism, which is a ACC student life organization, and a few other individuals, including Larissa, she mentioned it. I also enjoy working, reading, watching TV shows, game shows, poker, tennis, volleyball, as well as other sports, and learning. I'm currently learning how to play piano and trying to decide on what projects I want to work on next. I joined this panel because I think the topic of conflict resolution is an important one when learning how to live in society successfully.
Thank you, Benny. We are so glad you're here. We don't know what we'd do without you. Benny also helped create our autism-friendly business training videos. So he's kind of been involved in a lot of what we do. We're really appreciative. Okay, so thank you all for introducing yourselves. We're going to go ahead and move right into our discussions tonight that we want to, you know, that we feel are important. And we, again, if the conversation goes, you know, different directions based on what we're discussing, that's okay too. So within our topics, we talked about the 3 conflicts listed. So the ones that we were highlighting, like we said, was conflict within ourselves, conflict with things beyond our control, and conflict with others. So out of the 3 conflicts listed, is there one category that automatically resonates and just kind of stands out to anyone on the panel? And we're gonna, Jen's gonna take this one first, but then it'll be open for anyone else to respond.
Well, okay. So the first thing I think I need to say in this is that conflict is a part of humaning. It is something that we just have, I mean, whenever, okay, so let me back up here. When I was in college, I had this great business teacher who said, whenever there's more than one person in a room, there's drama. And, you know, whenever there's more than one person involved in something, we automatically have this different person who is contributing, who might have different ideas, who might have different, you know, emotional ties, who might have something at stake that, you know, might conflict with what is important to us. So conflict is just part of the gig. You know, you're born onto this planet, you live here, it's just part of the gig. You know, the question is, how do we work within it? And, you know, for whatever conflict we're looking at, whether it's internal or external, the key, it really comes down to one word, and it's just expectations. The best piece of advice someone ever gave me was manage the expectations, manage the experience. And I've used it for myself in my own goals. And I've also used it in all my relationships, both professional and personal. And I feel that we have to figure out what expectations really mean for us individually versus what are other people's expectations for us. And even though those are great and we can hear them and we can have conversations about that with them, ultimately other people are not living your life. And unless they're living your life, then it's really hard to slip into somebody else's expectations. Even when society is telling you, here's the expectations, here's what you have to do, unless someone's actually living your life, then their stake and their expectations are really small in terms of you, because ultimately this is your life, right? This is your body that you're driving. And I feel that we have to kind of figure out what our expectations are for ourselves and find some peace in that. And then also learn how to communicate with others about their expectations and find that meeting ground. And if there's no meeting ground, then have a conversation like, hey, maybe this just doesn't work. And that's okay if it doesn't work. We don't have to force it to work. We have to make sure that both people can meet each other's needs, that we can meet our own needs, and that we know what we're stepping into when we commit to a job or when we commit to a relationship. And I think that's where the conflict resolution skills really are magic, is just, hey, what do we expect from each other? What do I expect from myself? What are reasonable expectations? And am I living up to somebody else's expectations? And if I'm really being honest with myself, what are my core expectations?
Thank you, Jen. I would love to, Larissa raised a hand, so I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Larissa.
All right. Oh, my hand's still raised. Okay, so conflict with myself is a category that I resonate with because I struggle with perfectionism. I tend to put more effort and energy than is necessary into a task. Additionally, I'm really hard on myself sometimes because I want to be perfect. And I'm working on realizing it's okay to submit just adequate work sometimes, and it's also okay to make mistakes. It's how we learn.
I love that, Larissa, just kind of that reminder that it's okay to make mistakes, because that's the only way we're going to learn. And I kind of think that's one of those reminders we need to have posted up somewhere for ourselves every day, because it's the one that's easiest to forget, Does anybody else want to comment on this?
Amy,
Hey, Taylor, we're going to, I'm going to pass these questions to our guest host, and after the panel, you and I can chat. Do you mind if we do that? Okay, I'm so glad to see you here. It's so good to see your face. It makes me so happy. Yeah, just keep your mic muted and you and I can chat afterwards, okay? You just remind me, maybe send me something in the chat. Okay. All righty. Do any of the guests on the panel want to say anything regarding, or any of the guest hosts on the panel want to say anything else kind of with that follow-up of any of the categories that resonate with you?
I'll say something. I definitely spend a lot of time dealing with all three types of conflict, but most recently I've been thinking a lot about conflict with things beyond my control, like when the universe throws you a curveball and you just have to figure out how to handle it without having a meltdown, or maybe even just accepting that a meltdown might happen and it's just a normal part of living with autism.
Thank you, Benny. And that's something that, the term meltdown is something I hear a lot, and it comes up, and the word, I've always kind of like played with that wording as far as how to address it, especially as we get older and into adulthood, what that looks like. Cause I've heard, the term getting into the frozen zone. I've heard the term shutdown. I've heard the term meltdown. is there, I mean, just kind of going off script here, is there a preferred terminology for anybody that's guest hosting on the panel that you kind of refer, you're like, oh, I'm going into, I'm going into shutdown mode. Do you have a term that you use for that? Larissa?
Was the question specifically about shutdown? Because I usually think of shutdown, meltdowns, and burnout as being 3 different things. At least that's how I think about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Shutdown to me is when you're in freeze mode, basically, where sometimes that can happen after what we call a meltdown, but people may find themselves unable to like react or move, or they may seek out quiet places. And then burnout tends to be longer duration, and then they can last years. And it's when basically someone gets overloaded and they're not able to keep up with daily tasks. We may see that they aren't able to do skills that they used to be able to do, and they can recover them, but it's something that can happen, and they may actually be more at risk of having a meltdown. Sometimes people develop like a lower threshold and lower tolerance for sensory stimuli when they're in this burnout period. And I think it's worth mentioning that usually a big factor besides life stress and big life changes is over masking, which is basically suppressing or minimizing your autistic traits if you're neurotypical, not allowing breaks with masking. And I know we'll talk about that later, but that leads to burnout. And then meltdowns typically has to do with being overwhelmed with stimuli, but it can also happen with emotional distress as well. And that can look like yelling, or someone might make noises or start crying or start stimming more. Did that answer your question?
It does. And it just, I think it's really created a lot of, I think you set the stage for a lot of things we're going to be discussing too, about how this conflict can present in the workplace and in other environments, right? And so thank you so much for bringing those things up. And I love how you differentiate between the three. And because we are going to get into masking too a little bit later, but thank you, Larissa, because that was really insightful. And there's a comment in the chat about a quote from 10 Things I Hate About You. I don't like to do what people expect. Why should I live up to other people's expectations instead of my own? And I love this quote because it's one of my favorite movies. I think it's fantastic. So I love that this quote was put in the chat. Thanks to says from A. So whoever shared that, we appreciate it. So let's go ahead and talk about areas or environments in your life where you've noticed more conflicts cropping up with yourself and or others. And this question is for everyone on the panel who wants to answer, but Larissa's going to open up with the first response.
Okay, I've noticed more focused conflict with myself with group situations, since I sometimes have trouble recognizing when it's a good time to join in the conversation without accidentally interrupting people. Additionally, I may unintentionally misinterpret the emotions of others. I also may have trouble listening if I'm over masking. I may spend too much effort trying to remember to nod or show signs that I'm actually listening than actually listening. I've done this before because of another conflict with myself, and that is that I worry about what others will think of me, which is why I tend to worry about, do I appear like I'm listening sometimes? Mm-hmm. For instance, it can sometimes take a little bit of time to process what people are saying, and I don't want people to get impatient. I've been interrupted by people because they are able to say something quicker than I was saying it. And when that happens, I don't always get to say what I wanted to say when that occurs.
And that sounds like it can be really frustrating too, if you don't get a chance to get that out. Jennifer?
Yeah, I appreciate Larissa saying that about, Larissa, where you're talking about when you're having conversations and how you want to respond, or, maybe not having enough time to come up with the response that you want to come up with, and the conversation is kind of passed. I struggle with that a lot. And it's really frustrating. I had a concussion years ago, and it, I think, has affected my processing speed with how I respond to things. And I don't feel like I come up with a good response until sometimes an hour later or 2 hours later. And it's almost like my brain stops for a few minutes when someone says something. And it's like all the different people in my brain have to analyze it for a little bit. And then later I'm like, oh, I'm ready to respond to this. And they're already in a completely different state of mind, right? And I find that I'm having, some conflict with that because I feel like I'm not always heard with my position and with how I'm feeling about a situation. So I feel like I have to go back sometimes in my relationships and go, okay, I know, do you remember we were talking about this? I just remembered something, or I didn't quite understand at the time. And here's what I really need to say. Otherwise, it kind of haunts me. I feel like it chases me around until it's said. So I appreciate you bringing that up because I certainly resonate with that.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for sharing that. Yeah, and that's something that, how to respond to things, and especially how to circle back around to things, like, and what do we circle back around to and what do we let go, right? That may be something that we can address tonight, because I think that is something that we can internalize, right? We can internalize things to the point where they make us feel sick, or just really kind of keep us, Vanessa said, conversation ghost, right? Things that keep haunting you, right? And just keep coming back, and are really disruptive. So, okay, is there an area, or let's see here. I'm sorry, we answered that. What is an example of an internal conflict that, if not resolved, and just kind of going on that, could negatively influence your actions towards other people, and thereby incite an external conflict? So Benny, I'm going to let you take that question if you don't mind. What is an example of an internal conflict that, if not resolved, could negatively influence your actions towards other people and thereby incite an external conflict? And after Benny responds, anyone else who's guest hosting on the panel can respond as well.
Sure. One example of internal conflict that I experience pretty regularly is frustration over myself or other people not doing things correctly. When I have the need for everything to fit into a perfect order of how things should be done and don't leave room for being human, I tend to criticize myself more. But sometimes, especially with people I'm more comfortable with, I'll point out their perceived mistakes in an effort to prevent those mistakes from happening again in the future. Generally, this causes me to feel sad and/or for other people to get defensive and causes arguments to occur. So I've been trying to learn to let myself and others do things our own way. They may not be perfect, but they're definitely perfectly human. An example of this that I struggle with is when someone mispronounces a word. I desperately want to correct them, but I remind myself that they're just saying it the way they learned it, and as long as it's understandable and the idea they're trying to communicate gets through, there's no harm in saying words a little differently than how they're intended to be said.
I love that, Benny. Perfectly human. I wrote that down in quotes because that's that's a fantastic takeaway from that. Yeah. Does anybody else resonate with Benny on that one?
Yeah. So I wanted to comment on this one. For me personally, I know that when I'm like highly stressed, got a lot of work at school or something big coming up that I'm stressed about, I tend to like disconnect from others, both like physically and emotionally. So I might be on my phone more often. If I'm having a conversation, I might miss what the other person is saying, kind of go off in my own head. When really the beneficial thing would be expressing my stress in a healthy way, asking for help if I need it. And that also helps the other person to feel more needed also in their life. If they're close with you, they want you to ask for help and they want to feel involved in your life. And otherwise, when you turn in like that, it just is going to cause conflict because they'll be like, oh, they're ignoring me, or they're acting cold or whatever. And that can cause conflict if you're not attentive to their needs, things like that.
Olivia, that is so powerful, that concept of, hey, you've got someone over here who can compartmentalize and who wants to detach and deconnect and just sort of like, I've got to deal with this separately. But then you've got someone over here who is like spaghetti on a plate, everything touches each other. Let's talk about everything. And then you're like together. It's such an interesting dynamic to examine. But yeah, you're right. It's so easy to, when you're under stress, just it's that Larissa kind of hit on that earlier with the different meltdown, burnout, and shutdown modes, Thank you, Olivia, for sharing that. Olivia, you're actually going to tackle the start of the next question. What is an example of conflict with things beyond our control?
So I've thought of kind of three main areas with this one. So things beyond our control can include things like uncertainty in plans. If you don't know what's going to happen, such as like not knowing if you're going to get a certain job, if you're going to get accepted to a certain school, and you kind of plan things around this uncertainty. And then if you don't get what you planned, that can cause conflicts because you're forced to make another decision that maybe you didn't want to make. And so it's like, what's your plan B? Or do you have a plan B? So it's important to lessen the stress that might cause if you have backup plans. Another one is like obstacles or things that are there that we wish we could change. So this can be like big life changes, like moving to a different city, divorce or death in the family. It could be like family finances that are difficult, things like that can cause definitely a lot of conflict within your life that you may not really have a lot of control over in the moment. And then another one that I thought was a little bit different is when other people have certain behaviors that you don't like. So you would think that would be conflict with others, but sometimes the person is adamant about not changing, and you kind of just have to accept that they may not change their ways. And so, for example, like unhealthy behaviors or like political opinions and things like that. And that's just something we have to accept. It can cause conflict with others, but that's also, you can see that as something that just isn't going to change.
Those are some tough ones too. And we are going to tackle that in a little bit, talking about, how do we handle some of those differences between belief systems even, right? Because that's a huge thing. We're so polarized in so many ways right now. And, even talking about uncertainty in plans and obstacles, I feel, we've been in a global pandemic for the last 18 months, and it's been the ultimate like change in plans for people,
Exactly.
And so I think it's just kind of taken a piece of that, sort of what it must feel like to struggle with that on a more consistent basis, of the anxiety of, what is my plan B and how do I get it to work out, plan B and C, and how do I become flexible with plan A not working out, because that can be pretty challenging. So thank you, Olivia, for bringing that up. Does anybody else want to add to that? Larissa.
I wanted to add to what Olivia said about how someone may not change their behavior, because there's something similar that I can think of, and that's that we cannot control what other people think, even if it feels like we can. So it's something else that, it seems like we should be able to control, but we cannot control it, no matter how much we want to. It's really easy for me to think if I say all the right things, I'll make a good first impression and I'll be liked by other people, and that will be thought of positively. However, that's not always the case. Sometimes we don't know why someone may not like us. Sometimes they may not even have a reason. They just may not like us. But something I'm starting to realize is that we can control how we respond to other people. as well as how we think of ourselves. I can educate others about behaviors that might be misconstrued, but ultimately it's up to the other person to decide what they think. People tend to judge, and I have to decide if I will let it impact how I feel about myself. I try to remind myself that I know myself better than others, and I know what's best for myself. Others can have a different opinion about me, but that doesn't have to change my own opinion that I hold about myself.
Marissa, that was I love that. That was powerful. Ashley, I'm gonna hand it to you and then to Jen.
Well, I just had to piggyback off of Larissa real quick because that was great. And it like touched me because this is something that I have to keep reminding myself. And also, you know, when working with students and knowing that, you know, that experience, Larissa, you just stated, sometimes we just automatically twist it to a negative. And we think that it is, you know, it is our fault, and it's not. And I think that is the hardest thing when we're talking about conflict, whether internally or with other people, being able to see that there is a potential for there to be a positive outcome, a negative, or even a neutral outcome. And it's not always on us. So Larissa, thank you for sharing, because that really hit home.
Jen?
Yeah, I want to say, you know, mad props to Olivia and Larissa, because I think all this has been very beautifully articulated. The other thing that comes to mind for me is what is mine and what is somebody else's. You know, the way that I feel about something is mine. The way that somebody feels about the same thing belongs to them. And so I kind of started to look at feelings almost like our prized possessions. Like, it's not my job to steal your prized possessions, right? It's not my job to steal your feelings. You know, it's not my job to steal your point of views. I can only express mine, and also set boundaries, right? Like, we're going to be respectful with each other, and we're going to hold each other in a safe space. But also, I can feel sad, and I can feel, you know, hurt by something, but also realize that, you know what, this belongs to you. It doesn't belong to me. You know, if you're hating on the fact that I like the color green, you know, that belongs to you. I like the color green. I'm going to keep liking the color green. Like, that will never change, you know, but my love of green belongs to me. And that's really helped me too, from feeling a little bit less, I think, sometimes defensive if someone disagrees with me on something that I feel is really important, or feeling, you know, like, oh, you don't like what I'm saying, so you must not like me. You know, I've kind of started to disconnect some of that, you know, which was a huge thing for me in my 20s, was like, please like me, and please like everything I stand for. And, you know, kind of learning that, you know, we can still disagree, but, you know, have a good relationship, I think, especially now, is really, really important. And that's definitely something that I've worked on over the years.
I love that. Ashley and Jen, I hear you both saying stuff around the bigger picture of protecting ourselves in regards to how other people's expectations of us, right? And just, you know, and it's having sometimes, you know, sometimes we have to do that in order to preserve our own sanity, right? And just as, you know, we have to take care of us, right? Because if, you know, we don't put on our mask first, we're not going to be able to help anyone else, you know, to use an analogy from flying. And so I really appreciate those thoughts around that. Definitely. Does anybody else have any before we move on? Well, what are some stress signals and warning signs that, you know, something might be really upsetting you, right? Because this is one of those things that we become in tune with as we get older. And, you know, in talking about, like, when you come up to a railroad track, okay, you know, there's a train coming, if the signals are working, and, you know, kind of telling you what to expect next. Do we have we usually have stress signals that start we come to recognize over the years is this is where I'm starting to feel myself get really to that point of no return or getting stressed out. What are some stress signals and warning signs that something might be upsetting for you? So this is for the whole group to answer, but I would love for Sydney to open this one up if possible, if you want to.
Yeah, that's cool. So yeah, just as Amy here was saying, like it is different for everybody, but personally for myself, whenever I am starting to find that something is like stressing or upsetting me, is like one of the signs that I have is that I can see is that I start like fixating on specific details of kind of like the kind of whatever's making me uncomfortable, and it's like I start replaying in my head like what got me up to this point, and it just like it gets me worked up, and it just seeing red. Like I think the best analogy I can think of this, like how I feel, is that it's like pretty much a chained up dog. Like sometimes I just want to get free, but it's like a chain's just constantly pulling him back into it, and it just makes you upset, and it just makes the dog upset. And it's, I mean, aside from that, I just also feel that for me it's also harder for me to like breathe and exhale naturally. Like I just feel like I kind of am like whenever I do get stressed. And I mean, and yeah, sorry if I'm going on a lot, but like generally it's when this stuff happens, I am still working on kind of getting myself out of this loop, because I feel like it happens to me pretty often. Like I do have a lot of anxiety, but it's that like I try to do a few things like that, and some of the things that have helped me in the past have kind of been like also like just taking some time to walk away from the situation, kind of decompress, kind of getting my thoughts out so that they don't constantly ruminate in my head. And then also like just stopping myself and saying, hey, is this really worth getting upset about? Like is it really worth like you feeling like you're going insane? And then and just telling myself, whatever problems I'm having, I'll get through it. I'll just get through it. It'll work out in the end. Everything will be all right. And all of that.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Sydney, and sharing your strategies, because one of the things we do want to do as we're kind of moving through the evening is share strategies with one another that maybe we can use as put in our toolkit, kind of our takeaway swag bag of information. Is going to be how we can help each other, maybe get ideas, because we all are unique in how we develop some of these strategies for ourselves and what's going to work for us, right? And I love how Sydney sort of outlined, okay, well, first I take time away. Sometimes I have to just remove myself from the situation because it spirals, right? Because there are times we tell ourselves it's not that big of a deal, but for us in that moment, it is. And I think it's important that we honor that thought of, for me, this is a big deal right now, right? So what do I need to do to help myself in this moment in whatever way I can, and work it within that. And then the taking time and walking away can sometimes create space for us to go, okay, now this doesn't seem like quite as big of a deal. So I like how you ordered that.
I've actually kind of gone into for therapy before, and they kind of recommended to me that I start trying to practice mindfulness more. And I've been really trying to get at that sort of thing.
I love that. Thank you for sharing your story and your experiences there. Benny, did you want to share anything around this?
Well, one of the biggest conflicts I have with something I can't control is dealing with traffic and other people's need to get where they're going safely and quickly. I frequently remind myself that I can't control how fast or slow someone else on the road is going to drive, and whether they're going to have a tire blowout and swerve into my lane. So respecting other drivers' needs is something I take to heart and try to give my full attention to when I'm out on the road. It can be pretty taxing, and I don't envy folks that have to make their living driving in places like New York City and Los Angeles, because Austin traffic's pretty bad in a few places, but it pales in comparison to those cities, I've heard.
Thank you for sharing that, Benny. It's such a practical thing too. I was taking a transit, I'm sorry, there's noise in the background here. I was taking a transit bus from the LA airport 2 weeks ago to the rental car place, and the bus driver, I was just admiring this bus driver, hauling all of us to the rental car place from LAX, and the traffic, it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And I was just like, oh my gosh. Yeah, I definitely admire the patience, there. Jen?
Yeah, I just want to honor what Benny was saying about Austin traffic. Yeah, I feel you on that, Benny. So I learned something today that I thought was actually really cool to bring to this tonight, because I'd never tried it before. And I was having kind of a stressful afternoon, and I was starting to get, like, I know for me, I start feeling it in my body. I get this really nervous energy. Sometimes I start cleaning stuff. That's my go-to, especially when I'm angry. So I angry clean, because I have to have my environment better. So I do all sorts of, like the energy in my body gets accelerated, I think, when I start getting kind of up in my emotions, like really, really entrenched in them. And I heard this thing today, and it was called the 11 breaths. And the idea is it's just 11 deep breaths. And so I thought I would give it a go. And I was sitting there on the couch, and I'm like, I can do this right now. And it didn't take very long at all. And it's 11, probably 4 or 5 second breaths. So inhaling for 4, exhaling for 4. And as you do it, you can get longer, 5 or 6 seconds inhales and exhales. And I have to tell you, friends, after about 7, I was feeling pretty good. I was really surprised that I could completely change my body, in, 30 seconds, 35 seconds that way, with doing kind of these breaths. So, if you feel like, oh, 11 is too much, go with 7, or 8. And it's deep breaths, right? Because we tend to breathe really shallow. If you think about, like, lungs is like, this is the top part of your lung, this is the middle, and this is like the belly of your lung. We do most of our breathing up here. Okay. And so really, when you're deep breathing, you're getting all the way in here, and you're giving your lungs enough time to get all that oxygen in there. And it just does magic for your nervous system. So highly recommend, just a little nugget of goodness that I got to experience for myself today. If you're looking for something else when you're in that state, there's a great resource exercise where you find something in the room that pleases your eye. So I have, interestingly enough, this coffee mug that my dear friend Amy gave to me. And so one of the things that we can do is we pick an object that is pleasing to us, and we go, okay, this is a coffee mug. It has light green, it has blue, it has brown, the rim is purple, it has a place where I can put my hand, it is about 7 inches tall, it feels smooth, if you can pick it up and touch it. So, that's something that automatically takes us out of that limbic system where our emotions are kind of spiraling, and gets us back into our thinking brain to help us resource and go, okay, now I get what's happening in my body. Now I can make some decisions, because that's really the trick, is getting us back to the place where we can make decisions.
So true. Such a great, and I put it in the chat, the 11 deep breaths and then the grounding exercises. So, and Ashley added mindful eating on something and focusing on the taste, texture of an item and how it feels on your tongue, centering. Oh, so good. Such good stuff. Thank you, Ashley and Jen. These are the kind of strategies I would encourage everybody to take note of, maybe jot down. And yeah, if you have any questions about how to utilize those strategies more in detail, feel free to email us or ask a question about it. So, Larissa, did you want to add something to this?
Yes, I'll be real quick. I just wanted to say that I relate a lot to what Sydney said, because I also get anxiety, and I've also worked on mindfulness and therapy as well. And I really struggle sometimes with ruminating, and strategies I have found helpful is basically distracting myself and trying to think if it's something that immediately needs to be dealt with or thought about right now. Usually it doesn't. And also lowering my standards, because it's usually when I'm being a perfectionist that I'm overthinking about my mistakes.
Thank you so much, Larissa, for sharing that that piece of your own struggle in that area, because that is that overthinking process, man, that can be a just it can kill on the entire day. So I'm going to shift the conversation to Ashley to talk a little bit about, because we want to kind of focus in on areas that we really feel impacted by, that we really feel these things, right? And in our post-secondary environments, because we kind of like to always center our conversations in those post-secondary environments like school, any kind of training program you're in, college, university, whatever, and then also in the workplace. And so we're going to kind of move into those discussions specifically, but I would love to hand it over to Ashley to talk a little bit about, her experience with, doing what she's doing, and the student involvement engagement, just kind of what she sees at that level.
Yeah. So Amy, I'm going to kind of combine a lot of the questions all together when talking, but I would love everyone to jump in on the panel because everyone has been saying something that, I just had in my notes that I wanted to include because it's so important. So when I am working, with students and just thinking of post-secondary or any type of training, I think a lot of conflict first I see is conflict within ourselves. So that self-doubt, questioning, should I be here? Should I deserve to be here? They call that a little bit of imposter syndrome as well. And that has increased a lot for my students since coming back from COVID. Thinking, okay, do I deserve to be in this spot? And then a lot of conflict with peers and with professors. And one thing that I always tell, just tips that I think are really helpful is first us realizing, as Jennifer said at the beginning, conflict is going to happen. I think we try it. Sometimes we go through our day trying to avoid conflict, and it is going to happen. And some things that are helpful is first us realizing that when we are having maybe conflicts with other people, we all communicate in different styles and we all have learning styles. And then helping yourself realize that someone else has a different communication style than you is really helpful, as well as realizing we all undergo stress, but stress is different for everyone. So for some, it could be, allergy stress. Allergies come and that stresses us out. Some, it could be a change in schedule and that stresses us out. So when I talk with students, whether they're neurodiverse or neurotypical, it's first like put yourself in that other person's shoes and try some perspective taking and try and take a look to see where they're coming from. Now we talk about what time of the year do we see a lot of this? A lot of issues with conflict management. I say it's throughout the year. At the beginning of the semester, it's really difficult with that transition back. I'm sure everyone on the panel that has either going to work after a long break or even transitioning to be back in person from virtual, that is really difficult. And midterms are also, so every time like a big something is coming up, that's when we see a lot of increase of stress and more internal conflict happening. One of the things that I think Jennifer or Larissa might have pointed out was about expectations and realizing the expectations of like ourselves. Coming into college, a lot of us, we don't know who we are. We're still figuring that out. And I'm way out of college and I'm still figuring who I am. But that expectation of knowing going into college and figuring out, okay, what are the expectations of myself? And then when you're in a new environment, learning the expectations of that environment. So a lot of students come in and we are having trouble with communication with professors or peers, but they don't know what the professor's expectations are of them for this course. And that's something we have to ask. And please, Amy, stop me, because I want everyone to get in on the panel if they have anything else to say, because I know I'm like kind of combining all of the questions together.
No, this is good stuff. Thank you. And kind of talking about the expectations and the professors, because in our last panel, we talked about accommodations and we discussed, like, how do we get to know those things? Like, what is the approach you recommend? Because this approach, I think, can be carried into any part of life outside of campus. What approach do you recommend students and anybody uses in trying to kind of sort out what the expectations are for an environment?
Yeah, well, first, when you are even talking about accommodations, first you have to figure out for yourself, what do you need? What's helpful for you? So when we're in high school, we oftentimes don't know what works because everyone just kind of gave us things or put things in front of us. So in college or once you graduate, you're figuring out for yourself, hey, I like it when I am able to have a piece of paper in front of me and actually highlight things myself. Or it is helpful when I can record the professor and I can listen back. So first, figuring out, okay, what are things I need? And then second, I would highly recommend finding someone you trust to help bounce those ideas off of and help you navigate whatever system that it is. Finding, a mentor, an advisor, a friend, asking for help to get guidance on navigating that, because we all don't have the answers. And that asking for help is so difficult because sometimes we feel like we can't, or we feel like I don't know exactly what help I need. But if you're able to identify a trusted partner, someone you feel comfortable with, to help you figure out, okay, these are some of the things I need. This is how I can go about it. That can be really helpful.
Thank you so much, Ashley. This is really, this is really useful and helpful. And I put some of the notes in the chat, but if you want to summarize any more of those in the chat, feel free to do that as well. Does anybody else want to add to any of that or speak to any of that?
And also one more thing, knowing for students coming in with the accommodations with professors, knowing your rights as a student coming in. So you have rights. I think that's the biggest conversation I have with students every day, because they'll say, no, well, the professor didn't want to give me accommodations. Well, that professor doesn't have the choice because these are your rights. And if you need someone to help you in terms of figuring out how to advocate for those rights. And that could even just be, hey, I wrote up what I want to say and I have a script, but I need someone to read over it. There are more people in your environment that will be willing to help you with that than you may know. And I think for some of my juniors and seniors, they felt like there was no one that they could go to do that. And for a campus as the size of UT, sometimes we have to hunt, but there are people there that want to help you navigate that.
Yeah. And I love that idea of scripting things ahead of time, especially if if it's an area that scripting and planning how you're going to kind of handle things as they come along, especially if it's an area that you deal with conflict on a regular basis, whether it be internally or with other people. So thank you. Jen had her hand raised.
Yeah, I wanted to add to what Ashley was saying. My daughter is autistic, and she just started college this fall and has been away from school for a while. And so that's been a huge change because she, signed up for like too many classes and trying to figure out the work-life balance. But one thing that we ran into is she's like, I have this professor and he won't accommodate this thing. And I was like, okay, so where is your documentation you given it so that you're covered at your school? And she's like, well, I didn't know what to give them. I'm like, okay, cool. Well, let's work through that. Because the kick in the head is, even if you think you might not need an accommodation, or you might not need something down the road, especially when it comes to conflict. And, you might have some professors who just won't budge. And it's, this is kind of part of the thing, right, of advocacy, of saying, okay, I have this, right to, this accommodation. I've got this teacher who won't budge. Having the documentation and having the student support services behind you is just a tool to help you be successful in school. It's not a crutch. It's not like a terrible thing to have. It doesn't make you less. It evens the playing field so that you can have the same success that is, yours to kind of grab. And so that's something that I think is really important. Even if you think like, well, I'm in college now, this is not a thing. Please, whatever you do, even if you go to vocational school or you go to college or community college, wherever you're going, please make sure you plug into your student support services and that your paperwork is on file so that you can get the support that you need.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you so much. And Sydney actually added something in the chat that was helpful for her in school. And I love any of the, the tidbits or the strategies we can share with each other. I do want to thank you, Ashley and Jen, so much, because it's such a big part, I think, of the struggle, as well as and the avoidance too of, oh, I don't want to go do that because there's too much ambiguity around what needs to happen. So I'm so glad to know, Ashley, like there's, support individuals such as yourself in these communities that can kind of help navigate some of that. I want us to all consider conflicts we've had with others that seem to stem from differences in personality. So this is going to be kind of this is like, again, we could spend hours on this one topic, but does anyone want to share what that feels like for them, and or share your experience around that conflict with other personalities? And I am going to open it up to Sydney to tackle this first, if she would like, and then have Larissa add to it.
Of course. So I assume it's pretty similar for a lot of people, but I find the conflict stemming from differences in personalities to be frustrating, because it just feels like the person or people are kind of unwilling to give you any consideration and as to where you're coming from or your feelings, and it just straight up leaves you feeling like you're not like disregarded, and it makes you kind of pushes you outside your comfort zone, which, well, that is sometimes it is good to get pushed outside your comfort zone. Sometimes like it's good in moderation. And pretty much rather than just like giving up on working with someone just because, I think differently, it's like I think it's just because of my international I did major in like international studies back in when I went to university, that I try to put like my shoes in other people's, like put myself in other people's positions and like try to understand like, hey, why do you feel this way? And try to listen to them. And it's like, hey, like, this is what I am. Yet at the same time, I also am like, I may explain again why I feel the way they do to just give them more insight. And because I feel like if we're able to get on the same level, it's just easier to work together. Like if we're talking, just to know that we're kind of on the same page with things.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sydney. Larissa, did you want to tackle this a little bit?
Yes. I also wanted to add to what Sydney said, that it does help when I'm on the same page as someone else, but sometimes it's difficult to remind myself to try to think of what their perspective is instead of assuming it. Something that has caused a conflict before is I tend to want to know what to expect, and sometimes others with a different personality won't understand why I want to know the specifics of an event or a situation ahead of time. So this contributes to anxiety and can cause conflict. Additionally, I tend to be direct. I might have conflicts if someone struggles with direct blunt communication. And it also feels confusing when people aren't direct and expect that I understand what their hints or ambiguous statements mean. Something I'm working on is reminding myself that I can predictably count on things being unpredictable. As a result, I'm able to be more flexible with the unexpected, and also trying to remember that I can ask people to clarify if I think they're hinting, but they're just not saying what the point is or what they're really trying to mean. I will try to work on empathetically asking them to tell me what they're trying to say so I don't have to guess.
Thank you, Larissa. Someone put in the chat earlier, and I just kind of want to circle back around to it real quick, is that, you know, the word shame was mentioned. And I keep going back to that mentally. I just want to address it because it says shame related to communication breakdowns that I tend to have with neurotypicals and the stress of anticipating those miscommunications and the misunderstandings, which is often counterproductive. I think the word shame is so powerful, and it's one of those things that, you know, I'm curious as to if anybody wants to address that statement as far as those communication breakdowns and kind of that, because this also speaks to that. I think it speaks to masking a little bit as well, and kind of trying to think about, okay, well, how do I prepare to have this conversation? And someone's just going to misunderstand me, and just kind of creates this cycle of, you know, anxiety, and it can get counterproductive for people, especially when people, you know, the communication is expected to be a certain way, right? And so, which we tend to be, you know, there is a lot of ableism in that aspect as well, like of what, you know, what's expected of people. And so kind of being mindful of that. But does anybody else want to, Jen, did you want to speak to that?
Oh yeah, I bring shame into the equation. I'm all about it. Not all about shaming. Just want to clarify. Okay. Yeah, so shame is a really interesting thing, and it's important to understand that shame is not actually a natural part of our emotional toolkit. Shame is something that has been thrust on each other by misguided expectations. So that doesn't mean that that it's not a valid thing that you're feeling. What that means is that you were never actually meant to experience that the way that we experienced that. It was something that was it's like if someone threw a softball at you. You weren't naturally born with a softball attached to your shoulder. It got thrown at you. That's kind of how shame works. We throw it at each other. And so the reason I say that is because that idea about, you know, because I understand, because I have my own shame things that I have to work with, is that when we're feeling that and we're coming up against something, what is helpful is to own that you have the right to communicate, and you have the right to ask questions. You have the right to be heard. And those are really important things as humans. We want to be seen and we want to be heard, you know, and it's just figuring out how to accomplish those things in a respectful and meaningful way. And so, you know, that shame that we feel becomes like a stumbling block to getting to that communication with other people. And just, you know, I just kind of want to really stress to everybody that whatever has happened to you in the past, whatever's kind of been thrust upon you, the times that you've been put down, the times that someone said your question's ridiculous or whatever, understand that that is not true. Okay. Understand that every single person does have a right to be heard. And so, you know, the tricky part is how do we do that? So I think really what it comes down to is languaging. Okay. And languaging is really tricky because we don't know what to say a lot of the times, especially when we're asking questions and someone's like, why are you asking that question? And so I've just learned sometimes that I have to come back and say, you know what, it's really important to me that I know, and thank you so much for having this conversation with me to answer this question for me. You know, what are your thoughts? And it's hard to spin that right out of the moment. But I find that relaying the emotional part of it, like, wow, it's really important to me that I know. It means a lot to me to have the answer to this question. It means a lot to have somebody explain this to me. It's important to me. It matters to me. You know, having a little bit of emotional kind of, you know, connection there, you know, or my favorite thing is, I could really use your help. I really need help right now. And that's all. Help is kind of a hard word for us to say sometimes because we think it indicates weakness in our society. Really, it indicates a whole lot of gutsiness to tell someone you need help. It is an awesome and gutsy thing to do. So when we're talking about those expectations and trying to get that from other people, you know, getting to that kind of more vulnerable place, which is uncomfortable, puts somebody on the other side of, oh, I'm helping somebody, right? Because we respond to the word help. Oh, you need help? Oh, there's something wrong. We naturally respond to that word. So sometimes bringing in that languaging when we're trying to get expectations really does help.
Thank you, Jen. We did have a question come into the chat about, and it was a really good one. I would like to address this towards Benny, Larissa, Olivia, and Sydney, if you guys don't mind thinking about this for a minute. If we need to circle back around to it, we can. The question is, what about the expectation to be understood? I don't think that's a given, especially for ASD, for autism spectrum disorder. What about the expectation to be understood? And I think kind of, you know, and I just kind of want to point back to what Jen said a little bit earlier about being okay with speaking to what we need and what we're trying to communicate. But does anybody else want to address that question? Or do we need clarification on that question?
Yeah, what, can you say that again?
Will you want me to reread the question?
Yeah, like, what do you mean? What about the expectation?
Well, the question specifically says, what about the expectation to be understood? So I'm kind of curious if they mean to be, I'd like for somebody else to understand what they're trying to say, or that like, if I'm talking to you, I expect you to understand what I'm saying, right? And how can you tell honest misunderstanding from being purposely misunderstood, because it advantages the other person and disadvantages us. So how can you tell honest misunderstanding from, and thank you for that. Thank you for adding to that. How can you tell honest misunderstanding from being purposely misunderstood? I don't know, what do you guys think?
Okay.
Larissa? Larissa, you go and then Benny.
Okay, it can be hard to know 100% sure, because there's been times where I was sure that someone was doing it on purpose, because I was doing everything in anything possible. I was making sure that I was being understood. I wrote stuff down. I tried very different techniques, like phrasing it a different way. I think sometimes it's really difficult. I even tried visuals, but sometimes it's something as simple as I forgot to give context. And sometimes the person will clarify when I ask them. Usually what I will try to say is that I believe there's a miscommunication going on, and I will try to stay calm and state what I was trying to say, and that will usually work. And that's when I will find out typically that the person was not having malicious intent, or they were not doing it on purpose. But sometimes it's very difficult to know.
I would say one thing, if you do feel like you're in conflict with somebody and you're not sure if they are trying to understand you, one thing that I notice is if they tend to actually try to take time to understand. So that might mean, like, if you're having a face-to-face conversation, like they're actually pausing after what you say and thinking about what you're saying and not just reacting. I noticed that conflicts tend to get drawn out if one or both people are repeating themselves and they might not feel understood, and that would be a sign of that, or if they're just reacting or interrupting, things like that. They're not really listening to the other person.
Thank you for adding that. Benny, did you want to add to that as well?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that it's pretty much impossible to prove the intentions of somebody else. But as long as they're willing to keep the line of communication open and there's a back and forth discourse where you try to clarify each other's, given points, then you're pretty safe to trust that their, intentions are good for the most part. If they're frequently trying to shut you down or just not wanting to provide helpful and not wanting to be helpful, then it might be an indicator that they're not really trying to understand you the way that you're hoping to be understood.
Right, Benny. It is hard to determine intent, and that can be challenging. And I think sometimes it's, I think the best gauge is that like investment in the relationship or investment in the person. So if that person has spent time with you already, taken time to try and understand you, right? Because nobody listening to this or on this panel should be honestly like, and it kind of goes back to the shame thing, right? Working so hard to get people to understand them or to fit in. I just, it's always kind of personally bothered me a little bit, but there's been so much asked of, here's what you need to do to norms, right? We're fitting into the, what is that, right? And so it kind of creates this like environment of pressure and expectation, and it just breeds that, it seems like that sort of overwhelming feeling of how do I handle these situations? What do I do, right? And when really, I think sometimes that indicator is pointing towards, has this person actually invested time in getting to know me and spending time with me, right? And so I think that's important. But thank you guys for sharing that. And Ashley noted, it does take both parties in a conversation to make sure they're understanding each other, right? Now we are kind of getting into, it's 8:48. We may go over 9. I lied earlier. We might go past 9 a little bit. I hope that's okay with everybody. If anybody needs to leave, feel free. Okay, I'm not gonna make you stay. But we do want to cover, we want to dip into the conflicts that arise from different opinions, because that's so big right now. That's a huge issue, right? How do we still stay, how do we still recognize each other's humanity, right? Outside of everything else going on, right? And keep our civility with each other. And that's going to we're going to follow through with that into conversations about conflict in the workplace. And that'll be the last thing we talk about. So if we can hang in there for a few more minutes, we're going to cover that. But Jen is going to, because I know Jen's worked with, and I would love for Jen to post the link for, her blog in the chat at some point, because I know that she deals with some of this stuff as well in that. But Jen, can we talk a little bit about, and if anybody wants to jump in on this, please feel free, in our guest host, about conflicts that arise from differences in opinions, and how do we navigate those and maintain relationships with people, especially in our mind, we're like, they're terrible people, right? How do we get past that and around that?
Oh man, that's like the $1 million let's create world peace question, right? Yeah, so I want to acknowledge too what Olivia and Larissa and Benny were saying earlier. I think you guys have phenomenal insights into communicating with other people and whether or not someone's actually putting effort into communication, because it ties into this part as well. And that is that there are going to be some people who don't want to put the effort in. And it's all walks of life. It's all ages. It's, everybody, we can all be adults, but even adults have different levels of maturity, and they have different levels of willingness. And that's something too that can be really hard when you feel very passionately about something. And like I said, we do want to be seen, we do want to be heard. That's like our goal, I think, as humans, is we want that with each other. But sometimes people are not going to give us that thing. And sometimes it's a topic, sometimes it's many topics. And I think one of the things that we have to figure out is where we're going to let go and where we're going to draw our boundaries. So, for example, I had a huge conflict with my mother a couple of years ago, and it was not something that was directed at her, but she thought it was directed at her, and it was like Krakatoa, big time, Mount Vesuvius, Mount St. Helens, like kind of a big blowout, right? And it was a little while before we talked, and I think that we both kind of intuitively understood that that topic was just off limits for us. Like it was just done, it was buried, and that for us was just a point where we wouldn't engage. So that's one thing that you might have in a relationship. And my mom and I do have a good relationship, and we always have, but there are like peaks and valleys in relationships, right? Sometimes we're both on the top of the mountain together, and sometimes we are in different places, right? So one of the things, or one of the strategies is, okay, when is this off limits in this relationship? That's one question that you might want to ask. Hey, maybe this is just off limits. The other thing that we can do when we're engaged in a situation where we don't agree, okay, is we can say to the person, you know what, I know that this topic is really important to you, and how you feel about it is really important. I just want to honor that you feel that way. And I know that you'll honor that I feel very differently about it. And and it's okay for us not to agree, and hey, can we shelve this and maybe let's move on to something else? Or do we need some space from each other? Do we need a little bit of time to kind of decompress? And then maybe when we come back together, let's move on to something different. Like, let's kind of agree that we need a break from talking about this right now. Or, hey, you voted for that person, and I'm so glad that you decided to vote, period, right? That's not saying I agree with you. It's not saying I voted the same way. It's like, man, thank you for going out and doing your civic duty and voting, right? Because it takes all of us to make a democracy, right? There's a positive way that you can engage with differences of opinion. But even though we want to defend ourselves, we want to defend our position, we want to strong arm sometimes the other person and say, man, why don't you agree with me, right? We don't want to, destroy artwork in the museum. Why do you want to burn all the art pieces, man? What's wrong with you, right? We want to say things like that because we are like, dude, what's going on with you? But in actuality, sometimes it's like, hey, maybe they don't agree. Or if you want to really understanding somebody, hey, you feel really passionately about this. Can you tell me more about why this is important to you? I just want to understand. You don't have to agree. It's really just kind of an understanding game. And again, where are you drawing your boundaries and saying, we have such a huge difference of opinion, and I respect that. And your relationship with me and my relationship with you is super important. And that's more important than our disagreement over this area. So can we agree that we're just going to walk away from talking about this? Like, it's not like you matter more to me than, whether 4-leaf clovers are lucky, right? So you have to make those kind of decisions and have those conversations and be willing to step into that space.
Thank you, Jen. Those are some really helpful thoughts around a very hard topic. Benny, you had something that he wanted to add?
Yeah, just wanted to reiterate some of Jen's points and add that I think it's important to manage extremism in our lives in any form it presents itself, whether it's a political opinion, a religious ideology, or even a food preference. We're all entitled to have our own ideas about how we want to interact with other people in this world, but letting those ideas create conflicts is something individuals in an ordered society should try to prevent if possible. Our differences make us all special and keep things interesting, but they don't need to make us fight with each other.
Thank you, Benny. I love that. Thank you so much. Benny, did you say everything you wanted to say, or do you want to add any more to it?
I was gonna say respecting others' choices and opinions, even when they're diametrically opposed to our own, is important to maintaining an overall positive environment for all of us to live in together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And Larissa actually had some thoughts on this, but Larissa had something that she wanted to share. Larissa, do you want to do that now and talk about it a little bit?
Sure. Real quick, I did want to say what I wanted to add on to what Benny said very quickly, that it's really important to remember that both opinions are valid, but sometimes it's just coming from a different perspective. I did want to share an acronym that I came up with called GABCAP. And I also prepared a visual for, so I'll share my screen shortly. Actually, I can go ahead and do that now.
Okay. That'd be great. And then we'll transition into workplace stuff, because I think these strategies we can kind of carry into all environments. We're going to truncate our workplace conversation, but I think a lot of what we're talking about now translates in across all environments, right? And how we want to, just kind of with that bend on in the workplace, keeping it professional, right? And just kind of even just taking what Jen was talking about a step further and saying, let's just not talk about that stuff. We're not going to talk about this stuff at work, right? And then because I want to get to these videos too that you guys have. So go ahead, Larissa.
Right. And I can definitely, if it's okay, this could relate to workplace, because it's actually best practice for work as well. Can anybody see that?
I can't see it. Does anybody else see anything right now? No. Oh, wait, there it is. Yay.
Okay, so it's GABCAP, and this is actually best practice, in my opinion, for at work as well. So it stands for, these are things to refrain, and what I try to think of is put on my GABCAP. So I try to be mindful, and in general, these are things to try to refrain from, and from phrases from that I try not to say, and ways of thinking, or try to not, that I'm trying to change my thinking process. And that is not making generalized statements such as saying always or never or everyone, and are blaming, which also does not go over well in the workplace at all. Making accusatory statements such as you statements, and placing blame, making assumptions, trying to refrain from making assumptions about the other person, assuming that they did something of malicious intent. I skipped one. It was being argumentative. So this also is a behavior that I've seen not go well at work before with other people, where they just always kind of played the devil's advocate, or they just wanted to argue just because they liked arguing, and it caused conflicts. Comparing, so that's another thing that in the workplace, it just tends to make people feel better if, or comparing yourself to others or comparing people to other people is not productive, I'm finding out at all. And I think it can help with self-esteem in the workplace as well, because instead of comparing yourself to others in conversation, you're focusing on the task at hand, but also not bringing up past arguments. And that's best practice in general. And that includes like not bringing up past disagreements. And that was it. I'll stop the share.
Thank you so much, Larissa. That's such a great resource. Put on your GABCAP. I love it. Because those are strategies we can use, just sort of the takeaway, like what can we use in this moment to help us, right? I love that. So let's talk about a little bit around just a couple of, let's do our videos. Now that we're at this point in the evening, let's go ahead and do our videos, and we'll talk about those a little bit. And I think that'll cover what we want to cover. There's so many good things we still could discuss, but we could be talking about this for hours if we wanted to. So let's go ahead and Larissa, would you mind sharing the first video? And this is something that Olivia, Sydney, and Larissa made And we're going to talk around a little bit because it speaks to some of the situations that can arise in a workplace setting with regard to how conflict is managed. And so, yeah, we'll take a look at it and we'll discuss it from there.
Okay, I'll start sharing.
Thanks. It was there, but it just went away. Oh, there it is.
Okay, everybody. I would like your work on my desk by this Friday. If you have any questions, you know where to find me.
All right, Larissa. I was thinking we could split up different sections we want to work on and then come together by Thursday. Is that okay?
Sure. How about I work on this part and you can work on that?
Sounds good.
The next day,
Oh, hey, Larissa. I saw your PowerPoint and it looks way too complicated and wordy. Don't you think we should make it more like this?
Well, I thought we decided to each do our own work and read it together on Thursday. I've been working really hard on what I have.
Well, yeah, but I just think it would be much more presentable this way. And I think Sydney would prefer it this way.
Okay, well, if that's what you want, then maybe we should work in different groups.
Yeah, maybe we should. Excuse me, Sydney. Larissa and I would like to work with different people for this project. Our ideas for this project is too different.
Yeah, I've worked really hard on my part already, and Olivia wants to change it. Can't I just work by myself?
hold on now. I put you two together because you are the best employees I have in this area, and this is a really important project. Do you think you can work out your differences and come up with something together?
Well, only if Olivia will just let me do my portion my way.
But you're taking way too long. We need to have this in by Friday, and at this rate, we won't have it together by then.
But we need all the information present. Like Sydney said, this is a really important project.
Okay, I see what the issue is here. How about both of you bring me what you have tomorrow? And I will work with you to bring it into a coherent presentation. Larissa, try not to stress about having everything perfect. That's why we are working in a team to help each other. Olivia, try to be a little more patient with Larissa. You have some great work too, but we all have different ideas. I will follow up with you guys tomorrow. The next day.
Hey, Larissa, I'm sorry about how I confronted you about the project. I should have been more open to your work style.
It's okay. I understand. I know I can be very rigid with the way I do things. I just want it to be really good.
Okay, everybody. I would like your work on my desk.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Larissa. And thank you three for doing that. And I know we have another one that we're going to watch here in a second. I love it. I know it's kind of, I can see Sydney like, oh, I know it's kind of like always like hard watching yourself, but you guys did such an amazing job on that. And I just like kind of how it highlights there's somebody, you know, it takes so many of us as a, you know the saying, it takes a village. We've all heard that, right? But it really takes a community. It takes developing community around us. This is why we should not isolate and be alone, because we need community around us to kind of help us. And I love in that video how there's the moderator that, you know, okay, well, let's figure out how we can work this out, right? And it wasn't just a forget it, you two, I'll get someone else to work on it. Or, you know, there was someone who was actively involved in trying to help kind of mediate that and see where they could meet in the middle. And then the other two parties were willing to come together and go, hey, okay, this is where maybe I can give a little, right? This is maybe where I can and be a little more flexible in this area to see this, you know, to see this happen. But it's not one person saying, okay, well, I'll do whatever you want, right? Because we don't want that. We want to see kind of that both parties being able to understand each other a little bit better. So that was really good. Does anybody want to add to that? If not, we can go ahead and roll the second one. Can we watch the second one now? Are you guys okay with that? And then we can kind of start wrapping things up.
Okay, I'll start the other one.
In the first part of the scene, the characters will act out the incorrect way to solve a problem. During the second part, the characters will show effective strategies to resolve the conflict.
Can you come to work now?
Now I can't come in.
Okay, but you always say no when I ask you to come in.
I feel like you've been asking me to come in to work on short notice a lot lately.
If you don't go in now, you'll be fired.
You can't be serious.
I need a few seconds.
Notice how they're both using you statements, and an ultimatum is presented. In this situation, the manager uses some self-regulation skills in order to de-escalate and to think more clearly.
Don't you want the extra money?
The extra money is nice, but I'm also a student and I agreed to work part-time, mostly on the weekends. I have an exam coming up.
You're feeling overwhelmed?
Yeah,
What if you brought in flashcards? That way, you can study when you aren't helping customers.
that would work for this time, but I can't come in on an hour's notice often.
Thank you for being flexible. This wasn't something that I could have known ahead. Next time, I will call someone else before I call you.
I would appreciate that.
After the manager was able to de-escalate, they were able to reach a compromise that was satisfactory for both parties.
Thanks, guys, for sharing that one as well. Yay, love it. And I love that one too, because I think it really brings forward someone stepping up and saying, I think, and Ashley added this in the chat, I statements are very important. And so being able to step up and go, okay, well, I am typically unable to write. I will do it this time, but this is not like, and being able to draw that boundary. We see kind of actively taking place there is, okay, I'll do it, but this is not something I'm going to be able to do moving forward, right? And it's okay to do that, right? Don't ever feel like you're being bullied into something, especially at work, if you've already created those boundaries in the first place, right? Because I think it's easier for people to get caught up when they're stressed out. And this is the thing, like, something I want us to think about, and because we're skipping a lot of questions we had for the workplace setting, but something that we do is we get caught up in what's happening in the moment and we get really emotional, really upset, and that tends to come out, right? And so, just kind of managing our expectations of others, and that they're not always going to respond the way we want them to. Our crisis is not somebody else's crisis, and we need to understand that, right? So when we're experiencing that stress, we can't expect other people to respond in kind to that. And so I like how those boundaries were established in that. Thank you so much for presenting that. That was really good. And there's, let's see here, one more question I want to ask for everybody. Because I think this has been so awesome. And I know we're going over time a little bit. I hope that's okay with everybody. So let's just tackle one other question in here and then talk about a strategy, is the conversation around constructive criticism, right? So how do we handle getting feedback that's not what we're expecting, or getting feedback that maybe we would consider negative, or constructive criticism when, especially when we weren't expecting it, whether it be at work or at school? What are some approaches we can take for that? Larissa, do you want to start that conversation? There's somebody else. I don't know who. Let's see who we have on there. Whoever wants to answer that can.
I would just want to say that constructive criticism is for everyone. You won't be the only one who gets it. Take it as an opportunity to grow and to learn, and remember that the other person is giving you criticism because they believe that you can change. Otherwise, they wouldn't come to you.
Thank you for that, Olivia. Larissa?